It started way back in 1967, a long time ago. I was 10 years old at that time, but I can remember it like yesterday. I was an unobserved witness to a cross-dressing incident that affected my thinking and many other aspects of my life. It was a September afternoon. I was at home and not at school as my class had gone for a picnic, but I had not gone as my father had died only the week before. I was bored and so took my catapult and was trying to shoot some pigeons or parrots that were always to be found in the trees near Aunty Margaret's cottage. I had fired a few shots when the rubber band of my catapult gave way, so I just squatted down beside the water tank on the top of the outdoor toilet. In our part of town, the toilets were built a little distance from the homes. It was an unusually quiet afternoon, no infants crying, no radio, music or car sounds, so I stayed quietly in my perch from where I could see the back verandas of all the adjacent cottages. Suddenly, I saw movement from the back of one of the cottage. I popped my head to peek and saw that Aunty Margaret was signaling to Aunty Rosie in the next cottage, with her hands and in a hushed voice. Aunty Rosie was wearing a saree, which meant that she was going out. I saw her wave back to Aunty Margaret and go inside her house. A little later she stepped out holding a large traveling bag. She closed her back door quietly and quickly and went across to Aunty Margaret's back door. I was surprised to see Aunty Margaret, as she was working for a well-known pharmaceutical company and it was a weekday. In a little while I saw Aunty Margaret, who was in a cotton nightie, go to the end of her porch and wave out to someone down the lane. The person came into view and I saw it was Arthur. Arthur was wearing a shirt and cut-off shorts. He looked like he had just had a shower. He looked around and seeing no about, proceeded to Aunty Margaret's house. In the meanwhile, Aunty Rosie and Margaret had already gone inside. Arthur reached the back door of Aunty Margaret's house and was let in quietly. My curiosity got the better of me. I looked around and seeing no one about, climbed the tiled roof of Aunty Margaret's house, which had smoke tiles with vent opening for ventilation purpose, and large glass sheets in the middle of all the rooms for letting in natural light. Joe, my friend and next-door neighbor, knew about these glass sheets. He and I had many times climbed the roofs of these cottages in the dark and watched our female neighbors undress and dress in their bedrooms. We could see through the glass and hear through the openings in the smoke tiles. The experience was thrilling, but we were afraid of the consequences if we were caught peeking. Let me introduce the people involved. In our place, we called all our neighbors auntie or uncle, if they are older than us or in their 30s and above, out of respect. Aunty Margaret was a 40-years-old, buxom spinster who worked in a big pharmaceutical firm. She dressed in tight skirts and blouses, which highlighted her big chest and shapely behind. She was rarely seen without makeup. She had been widowed in her first year of marriage when her sailor husband had died in a shipping accident. In spite of many admirers, she had stayed unmarried. She was not given into sorrow and was very kind-hearted and generous. She often sponsored our neighborhood lotto evenings and was friendly with all the youngsters. We often did her errands, for which she tipped us well. Overall, she was a good-natured woman. Aunty Rosie was a little younger than Aunty Margaret. She was married and had 2 young daughters. Her husband was an auto mechanic who worked long hours. She wore skirts and blouse when at home but wore sarees when she went to the market or for outings. She looked very good in sarees. She was also well endowed with a good chest and a well-proportioned behind. She and Aunty Margaret got on well and went shopping and did things together. Arthur was a 20-something young man. He stayed alone in a small one-room apartment in the adjacent Chal No. 2. He repaired radios and household appliances. He also did household electrical wiring and repairs, and so everyone in the neighborhood knew him. The young girls liked him for his good looks and naughty comments, jokes and happy attitude. He also played the guitar and sang, making him popular at birthdays or other community functions. Now onto my story. I crouched quietly on top of Aunty Margaret's glass and watched the going on inside. Arthur was not in my vision, but I was in time to hear Aunty Margaret tell Aunty Rosie how she had dressed Arthur in her skirt and blouse last month. Aunty Rosie asked how it had happened and Aunty Margaret said that it was not planned. Arthur's work pants seam had given way while climbing the stepladder as he was rewiring Aunty Margaret's bedroom. Aunty Margaret had jokingly offered him her skirt. He was embarrassed at first, but she continued joking, and as they talked, one thing led to another, till she had coaxed him to try her clothes and he had ended wearing her bra, skirt and blouse. What started as fun got very exciting for both Aunty Margaret and Arthur. It progressed to touching and light petting and finally to kissing and caressing. They had stopped at that, but the effect of wearing her clothes had Arthur stimulated and he had requested Aunty Margaret to help him dress more often. She too had liked it, and so she had continued dressing him in her clothes secretly. Aunty Margaret had a few wigs and concert costumes that our local amateur Goan theatre group had kept with her. She had used these and her own clothes to dress Arthur. Arthur had looked quite convincing as a woman, so now he wanted to experience going out, and so she had planned to take him for a movie dressed as a woman. Unfortunately, he had hairy legs, which he did not want to shave. It would be noticed by the others, as he often wore cut-off shorts. Aunty Margaret realized that with a little make-up and right clothes to cover his legs, Arthur could be transformed into a good-looking woman. Aunty Margaret suggested that he would have to wear a sari for this purpose and she would click some photographs. Arthur said that he would be thrilled to wear a sari. Aunty Margaret said she too would wear one for the photo session, and that's how she decided to ask Aunty Rosie to dress them both. I watched as Aunty Rosie dressed both Aunty Margaret and Arthur in saris that she had brought with her in the traveling bag. Aunty Rosie asked Arthur to strip down to his underwear and wear a bra, a sari petticoat and blouse. Aunty Rosie and Margaret debated about the size of his chest and what to use as padding, but Arthur was by now familiar with Aunty Margaret's underwear, and soon he was clad in Aunty Rosie's petticoat and a nice-fitting blouse under which he wore Aunty Margaret's well-filled-out bra. By now even Aunty Rosie was enjoying herself. Every now and then she caressed Arthur's behind and new chest, and joked saying she did not know he was a sissy, which I could not understand at that time. In the meanwhile, Aunty Margaret also got dressed in another of Aunty Rosie's sari petticoat and blouse. What a sight to see her body! My own excitement was mounting. Aunty Rosie now shifted her attention to Margaret and helped her with her bra and petticoat. It was quite interesting watching Aunty Rosie touch Margaret in intimate places as she helped her dress. Aunty Margaret seemed not to mind and looked very happy to be touched like that. It was quite a pretty picture, seeing a young boy and a buxom woman in semi-attire being dressed by a woman who was enjoying dressing and touching them all over. Aunty Margaret then had Arthur sit while she did up his face. I watched trying to take it all as she powdered his face, applied lipstick to his lips and eyeliner to his eyelashes, and darkened his eyebrows. Arthur sat there docile and just did whatever he was told to do, like an obedient girl. When finally the wig and jewelry were fixed on him, I could not recognize him. He looked very attractive. In fact, he looked more attractive than Aunty Rosie or Aunty Margaret. He looked prettier than most of the women and girls in our neighborhood. Aunty Rosie then draped the sari on Arthur while Aunty Margaret helped him into a pair of heeled slippers. In a little while Arthur was transformed into a very attractive young woman. Aunty Rosie showed him how to adjust the sari and how to lift the pleats and walk. I was so engrossed in Arthur's transformation that I forgot everything around me. I also noticed that I was feeling a new sensation in my childish organ. The feeling was different from any I had experienced before. Aunty Rosie then helped Aunty Margaret drape her sari. I could tell that Aunty Margaret was used to wearing a sari. Aunty Rosie had to drape it around her, just like she did it for Arthur. Now it was Aunty Margaret's turn to stand docile as Aunty Rosie dressed her. There was a lot of times I saw Aunty Rosie's hands pass lingeringly across Aunty Margaret's chest, buttocks and waist. I did not understand it at that time, but I guessed that it was sensuous, as they were silent and the motions were looked very slow and deliberate. I watched quietly, realizing that the pictures of Aunty Rosie dressing Arthur and Aunty Margaret were being stamped on my mind. It was the first time I realized there was a lot more to just the sari. The underthings were also attractive. Besides, there were the makeup items like lipstick, eyeliner, jewelry, etc. All these required practice and some skill. When they were ready, I heard Aunty Margaret tell Aunty Rosie that she had made an appointment at the photo studio on the main street. Aunty Margaret went to the door. She cracked it open and checked that all was quiet outside. They guided Arthur between them outside and started walking towards the studio. It was sunny outside, so they opened up a parasol and held it so that Arthur was shielded from the sun. When I look back on this scene, it reminds me of scenes where mother-in-law prepares her bahu for an outing. The street was quiet and empty. I quickly scampered down from my hiding and took a shortcut by climbing the walls of the compounds so that I was at the studio before they reached it. I saw them approaching, 3 women dressed in Sunday wear sarees and well-made-up faces. 2 middle-aged aunties and 1 young woman. I pretended not to notice them as they approached me. Then when they were near, I suddenly turned towards them and greeted both Aunty Margaret and Aunty Rosie by their names, but stopped at Arthur. I looked at Arthur and then wished him good day, Auntie, too. Aunty Margaret and Rosie greeted me but continued walking. The other auntie just nodded. I followed closely as they tried to tell me not to follow, but I was suddenly excited and curious and wanted to know what they had planned for Arthur. I followed them and sat quietly in one corner of the studio. The photographer was reading a newspaper but quickly got his act together and welcomed them. Soon the studio was lit up and last-minute touching up was made. I watched as he helped them strike different poses. Aunty Margaret told the photographer to focus mainly on Arthur. So he clicked Arthur in many different poses, sitting, standing, side profile, with pala covering his head, with palu around his shoulders, and even with the pala down, exposing his blouse. Then he clicked Arthur along with Aunty Margaret in different poses. Aunty Margaret asked for a few pictures of Arthur sitting her lap. These pictures really sent a little thrill down my body. It was so different from the natural to see a male being seated on a woman's lap. The photographer did not know, he was under the impression that they were all women. Then Aunty Rosie joined them in a few photos. The best pose was of Aunty Rosie sitting in a chair with Arthur and Aunty Margaret sitting on both sides of her on the armrests. Finally, Aunty Rosie asked for a picture with Aunty Margaret sitting in her lap. She held Aunty Margaret around her waist and back, while Aunty Margaret had her hands around her neck. They looked at each other and not the camera for this picture. All through the photo session there was a lot of touching and soft caressing, which I found very exciting, yet disturbing. When the photo session was complete, they thanked the photographer and proceeded to the new UDP hotel. I followed them and sat in the seat next to Aunty Rosie. They now noticed me and ordered a plate of hot wadas. I pretended that I did not recognize Arthur and called him Auntie all along. Aunty Margaret then whispered in my ears that the auntie was Arthur and they were practicing for the next month's theater. We finished off our refreshments and we walked to the bus stop and waited for the bus. The bus arrived. Aunty Margaret and Arthur got onto the bus, while Aunty Rosie and I started for home. On the way, Aunty Rosie explained how Arthur was going to perform a solo song as a woman. I asked her why he had to perform as a woman when we had so many young women who could sing. She said that many of the young women were afraid of singing in public, due to stage fright. Besides, it was a novelty for a man to perform as a woman. I nodded and saw the look of content on her face, satisfied that she had answered my queries. We reached home and I went off to play as usual with my friends who had returned from school. The image of Arthur in a saree, however, stayed in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more intrigued I felt. I suddenly had a need to go to the bathroom. There I discovered my organ had become stiff and I was feeling a little funny. I waited that evening to see when Aunty Margaret and Arthur would return. But it soon got dark and I was called home by my mother. I wondered what Aunty Margaret and Arthur were up to. Many years later, and after reading articles on crossdressing, I had a smudged impression. True to Aunty Rosie's words, Arthur performed a solo song, which he sang in soft falsetto. He wore a red saree and was all dolled up. Many of the people watching could not believe that it was Arthur and they called out for an encore after his performance. Arthur obliged and the audience loved him. After the show I went up to him and told him that he was wonderful. I also told him that he looked better than most of the women present there. This made him smile. A lot of other people came to him and congratulated him. Finally, Aunty Margaret and Aunty Rosie came up to him. Someone had a camera and they asked them to pose. This time there was no secret and they posed for the pictures, Arthur the star with her admirers. I got to see Arthur perform a few more times, and each time I was more fascinated and a desire to perform as a woman was building in me. I had sung in the school talent contest and church choir. I had a nice voice, but there were better boy singers than me and I was relegated to the backups and choir. I now saw a chance whereby I could be in the limelight. If I could dress as a girl and perform well, there were a lot of opportunities for me. I also started fantasizing about how nice it would be if Aunt Margaret and Rosie would dress me in their clothes. That incident clearly stayed in my mind. I slowly started enjoying movies where the men dressed in women's clothes, especially sarees. I also started reading stories with cross-dressing content. My desire to dress in female clothes was now increasing. I found I enjoyed fantasizing being dressed as a woman. I secretly wore articles belonging to my mother while I was alone. My cross-dressing started out wearing bras, slips, and petticoats. My chance to wear female clothes in public came soon as I was selected to play a girl in the class play. However, I did not get an opportunity to dress in my favorite female fantasy dress, the saree, till much later. A boy among the girls. I had witnessed Arthur being dressed in a saree and transformed into a woman. The incident clearly stayed in my mind. The scenes of Aunty Rosie touching Aunty Margaret and Arthur in an intimate way also stayed on my mind. So whenever I saw Arthur, I felt a funny sensation. Here was this handsome guy, who secretly dressed up as a woman and enjoyed it. How he reacted to Aunty Margaret and Aunty Rosie in ordinary everyday life did not suggest any special friendship between them. He seemed normal and no one besides me knew about his and Aunty Margaret's secret liaisons and Aunt Rosie's involvement. It was a big wonder to me how a popular young man willingly dressed as a woman and went out secretly with an older woman. I wondered what pleasure he got from wearing female clothes and being treated like a girlfriend. I also sensed that such behavior was not looked upon kindly by society. If it was so, then why were Aunty Rosie and Aunty Margaret dressing Arthur in secret? My curiosity got the better of me, and fanned by comics and comedy movies of Laurel and Hardy, Indian comedians like Mahmood, etc., who dressed as women for laughs, I decided to find out more about such behavior. At that time in the 60s, there was very little info or writings on such behavior besides these, so I guessed that dressing in the opposite gender's clothes was more for stage in movies, to create comic scenes. Yet, whenever I read or saw such scenes, I was thrilled and imagined myself as the one dressing in female clothes. My imagination took over and I started fantasizing often about wearing women's clothing. I lived in a 2-room tenement, which was part of a Chal No. 1, 2-storied building divided into 10 of 12 tenements. This was at one end of the street and the Chal No. 2 was at the other end of the street. In between were the local better-income people cottages. These cottages had front and back porches, backyards at the end of which were the outhouse or toilets and large trees. In the backyards were clotheslines for drying out the washed clothes. The backyards had no walls, just stone markers, so the women could pass from one yard to the other with climbing or opening gates, etc. I used to pass through the yards and look at the female clothes like dresses, skirts, etc. I imagined how I would look in them and if they would fit me. Sometimes the urge was there to touch or try out some of the clothing, but I did not want anyone to see me doing so. I knew that I would have a lot of explaining to do, especially if I got caught wearing female clothes without a proper reason. In time, I became a little bold and started touching female clothing that were on the clotheslines. Every time I touched a piece of female clothing, I got very thrilled and excited. Often, if the occasion permitted, I held them against my body, feeling the excitement. I had to wait a few years before I was to experience wearing female clothes. I was 15 at that time. My face was very androgynous, as I was fair and had no facial hair yet. I was small-built, short and slim, and looked like a boy of 12 or 13. That year my family was unable to go to Goa, my parents' native place, for our summer vacation. Most of the other families in our chal number 1 had gone on their summer vacations to their native places. Instead, I joined the community/parish summer holiday club. At the club one could play indoor games, read comics or storybooks, play volleyball or hockey if one was inclined to. The timings were from 9 a.m. to 12 noon and from 4:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. every weekday. Every Thursday afternoon, a western, cowboy, or cartoon movies was screened in the school auditorium for the club members. I had just finished my SSC or high school final year and was awaiting my results. In the meantime, I was going to the local garage every morning so that I got familiar with mechanical work. I only attended the club in the afternoons, after 4 p.m. After the first week of attending the club, I became familiar with 2 girls, Lourdes and Julie, who were my neighbors and the same age as me. I had known them from when we were children, but now it was different as they had changed so much. Lourdes, who lived in chal number 2, had grown tall and stood nearly 5 feet 10 inches in her bare feet. Now she had a slim, boyish and athletic body. Her best feature was her long and shapely legs. Her hair was shoulder length and straight. Her facial features were oriental and flat. She had smooth dark skin with none of the blemishes, like acne or pimples, that teenage girls suffered. When not in jogging pants and t-shirt, she wore home-stitched knee-length printed terry cotton dresses, mostly to church. She looked much older than her age and joined the boys in playing volleyball and basketball. Since she was taller than most boys our age, she was called Tower. She was popular with the boys, as she took part in all their impromptu fun games. Julie, the other girl, lived in one of the cottages, was the opposite of Lourdes. She too had grown and was around 5 feet 2 inches tall. She had fair skin and a pretty face, which was highlighted with clever use of kajal or eyeliner and light lipstick. Her hair was long and dark auburn in color. She had a nice figure with well-developed chest and buns, making her a hit with the boys at the club. She wore short skirts and tight blouses that showed off her big chest and round behind. She too joined the boys in playing games, but she was not as athletic as Lourdes. The boys enjoyed playing with her and touching her intentionally. The 2 of them were always seen together. They had bicycles and rode to and from the club. Lourdes had a full-sized boy's bicycle, whereas Julie had a new girl's bicycle. However, on most of the days Lourdes gave Julie a lift on her cycle. Julie sat sideways on the crossbar of Lourdes' cycle, making it look like Lourdes was a boy giving his girlfriend a ride. This prompted many of the boys to tease them, saying that they were a les couple. I had seen a few pictures in adult magazines secretly and knew what it meant. They seemed very friendly and nice, and we slowly became good friends. Then I started accompanying them to and from the club. At first, Julie used to give me her cycle and Lourdes used to give her a ride, but Julie had to go for stitching classes sometimes, and so Lourdes started giving me a ride whenever Julie was not with us. The first time she offered me a ride, I was reluctant and finally hopped onto the carrier at the back. Lourdes, however, said that it was difficult to control the cycle while turning and convinced me to sit astride the bar, in front. Sitting in front, I felt like a girl being taken by a boy for a ride. At first, I was shy that the other boys would tease me. Lourdes guessed, and so I sat behind whenever we were near the summer club. Once we were a little way off, she stopped and I changed position and I sat up front. Sitting in this position, I was between Lourdes' arms and my hands and back pressed against her small but firm chest, arms and legs as they brushed against me. Sometimes we exchanged positions, but it was difficult for me to handle Lourdes' weight and the high seat. One day Julie said she wanted to try and see if she was able to manage taking me doubles. It was quite funny and we nearly crashed. I, however, enjoyed feeling Julie's chest press against my back and hands. A week into the summer camp and the girls asked me what I did on Saturday and Sunday afternoons, as on those days I did not go to the garage. I told them that I usually took a nap. They told me that they usually spent Saturday and Sunday afternoons reading comics, magazines, playing carom and cards or just chatting on Julie's back porch. I told them that I would like to join them by 2:00 p.m. after doing the dishes and cleaning up the kitchen, which was part of my chores. They laughed, saying that they did not know of many boys my age doing household chores. It seemed very girly to them. We talked some more and they told me that they went for the 10 a.m. swimming session that was girls only on Saturdays. They asked me if I could come to the club by late morning, as that was the time it was hot, so most of the older boys and girls just hung around playing tricks or jokes on each other. I told them that since I was free on Saturday mornings, I would be at the club. I went to the club the next Saturday morning and polyed some indoor games for a while. By 11:30 a.m., most of the smaller boys and girls had already left for home. The older boys and girls were playing catch with a volleyball and some were throwing balled-up papers, etc. at each other. Lourdes and Julie were talking to Father Peter regarding some program and Julie had left her bag with her swimming things on the bench. Some of the boys decided to play a prank on her and hid it. Julie made a show of begging them to return it to her. Eventually they showed it to her, but instead of giving it to her, they started passing it around and Julie started chasing it. She managed to get it, but lost her slippers in the bargain. Now Julie got fed up and gave them the other one too, saying they could have both. Fr. Peter had already left and Lourdes now intervened. The boys started throwing it over her as she tried to block them. This went on for some time until one of the boys in his excitement threw the slipper onto the ledge of the clubhouse. The ledge was 10 feet high. To get to it one had to use a ladder. Lourdes got angry and taking a small stick started hitting the boys, who made a run for it. They stood at a distance laughing and watched as Lourdes and Julie tried to retrieve the slipper. I had watched the whole scene from a distance. I approached Lourdes and told her that if we could lift Julie up onto our shoulders, then she could use the small stick she had to pull the slipper off the ledge. Julie said she was wearing a short skirt and it would ride up her thighs. Lourdes asked me if Julie and I could support her on our shoulders. We tried but found her weight too much. Finally Lourdes agreed to make me stand on her shoulders. I was hesitant, so she asked if I was afraid of heights. I said that I was also selected to be the top of the pyramid during our PT exercises. She said she could easily support my weight. Everyone present watched as she crouched on her haunches. Then she asked me to sit on her shoulders, putting my feet one on either side of her head. Now with Julie supporting me, she slowly stood up. Then I slowly rose to a standing position. Lourdes held my legs for support. Now my eyes were in line with the ledge. Using the small stick, I slowly retrieved Julie's slipper. There were also some tennis balls, which I pushed down with the stick. I then slowly sat on Lourdes' shoulders as she crouched down. Everyone present was amazed at Lourdes' strength. They were also amazed that a girl had lifted a boy so easily. Some of the boys had earlier tried to retrieve the balls from the ledge, but had failed. I too was amazed, but more thrilled to be lifted like that by a girl my age. I also realized that I like girls who were physically stronger than me. This incident brought us closer and more friendly. So by the second week of summer club, I was meeting Lourdes and Julie every Saturday and Sunday afternoons, between lunch and tea time, at Julie's back porch. Julie's back porch was an ideal place to while away the afternoons as it was wide, secluded, quiet. We played quietly for fear of disturbing anybody's afternoon nap. Her adjacent neighbors were Aunty Margaret and Aunty Rosie. At first, we just played drafts or read comics and magazines. Then one day we decided to play cards on points system, with the loser having to fulfill a forfeit. We started with simple forfeits like hopping on one leg the length of the porch, staying still for 2 minutes, etc. till one day, I asked Julie, the loser, to climb the guava tree. Julie hiked her skirts up and attempted to climb, while Lourdes and I had fun at her expense as she tried to climb in her tight skirt. Eventually, she was able to climb till the main fork, about 5 feet from the ground, but not before we had a good view of her underwear and thighs. The next day, Lourdes was asked to do a headstand. She was wearing a simple, short, flared skirted cotton printed dress. She tried to tuck her dress between her thighs, but we had a good view of her thighs, underwear and all. We laughed it off, like good friends, telling her that for a slim girl she had nice thighs and buns under her dress. Our forfeit started getting naughty and creative. The next Saturday afternoon, Lourdes carried Julie cradle style and walked the length of the back porch. Lourdes easily lifted Julie and carried her in her arms. Lourdes was not even straining and proceeded to walk the length of the porch and came back with Julie in her arms. She kept on holding Julie in her arms and did not show any signs of tiring. I now realized that Julie was enjoying being lifted by Lourdes. The way they looked, I knew that Julie was happy that she was in Lourdes' arms. Lourdes whispered something in Julie's ears, but I was unable to catch it. They laughed and I told Lourdes that she was physically very strong for a slim girl. Only some days ago she had lifted me on her shoulders. She said that was different, but she could lift me in any style if I was willing. Before I could answer, she grabbed me and I found myself being lifted off my feet in her arms. I could only wrap my arms around her neck in an instinctive reaction. My body started feeling pleasant sensations as I held onto her neck and felt her small chest against my body. I was getting excited. The feeling was new. She carried me and started walking the length of the porch and back, asking how it felt to be carried by a girl. It was a pleasure I could not describe, just being carried by her, and I showed no signs of wanting to be put down. Julie asked me if I was enjoying being carried. I told her that I was not aware that I would enjoy being carried by a girl so much. This was different than when she had lifted me on her shoulders. Lourdes was still carrying me in her arms when Julie said that I had to fulfill a forfeit now. I asked why, and she said that Lourdes had done 2 forfeits and it was my turn anyway. She went to the clothesline and pulled off a dark printed dress that was drying out there. She said that it was a dress that she had stitched only last week. It was a simple A-line dress with a round neck, very short sleeves, and a flared skirt, and it would fit me. I did not understand much of what she said, but realized that I was being offered a chance to wear a girl's dress. Meanwhile, Lourdes still held me in her arms, and she threatened to carry me outside to the street where a few boys were playing French cricket. I did not want the other boys to see me like that, so I agreed, and Lourdes let me down, back on my feet. I was asked to remove my shirt, which I did, feeling shy and embarrassed to be half-dressed in front of the girls. I slowly took up the dress and was about to pull it over my head. The girls pulled it around me. I cannot remember the details after that. Only I was excited beyond anything I had experienced so far. The girls told me to remove my short pants. Now I had only my thin underwear under the dress. The girls quickly started playing another round. Lourdes and Julie were enjoying what they thought was my discomfort. I pretended to be at a discomfort, but inside I felt elated that I was finally able to dress in female clothes. We played a few more rounds, and I was unable to concentrate and lost. Lourdes and Julie both took turns carrying me while I was dressed in her dress. I was finally unable to control myself, and I told them that I was excited and I was feeling like peeing. Julie told me to hurry as she did not want me wetting her dress. I went to the toilet and realized that I was reliving myself standing like a boy while wearing a dress. After an hour or so they told me that I had been quite sporting and had worn a dress without a fuss. I pretended that I felt embarrassed. They said they would not tell anyone. That night I went to sleep all excited and dreamt that I was dressed as a girl and I was enjoying myself with my girlfriends. I woke that morning feeling the stickiness in my shorts and realized that I had been having wet dreams.